Welcome back to Conversations Different, a podcast from the Santa Fe New Mexican featuring the interesting people and places from northern New Mexico. This week, we are speaking with Santa Fe chef Lois Ellen Frank. She's an American food historian, cookbook author, educator, and Ph.D. This is Inez Russell Gomez, and I am excited to be talking about the indigenous food revival taking place in the United States. Welcome.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here.
And despite my confusing directions for the parking lots of the New Mexican, we managed to meet. And one of the things we discussed walking over here is kind of to frame where we are in this moment when it comes to cooking among the various, nations. You wrote in 2003, Foods of the Southwest Indian Nations. It won a James Beard Foundation Award, Cookbook Award, and that's like a big, big deal. And it kind of was the beginning of something. It was the beginning of the Native American food movement. I worked with Chef Walter Whitewater, who I also cook with at Red Mesa Cuisine, our catering company in Santa Fe. And we really tried to put into the forefront Native American cuisine. And I use the word cuisine. That was a part of my academic research because I think Native people, the cuisine was never elevated to that or equal to its European counterparts. And I really spent quite a bit of time working on doing that. I think it's diverse and rich and delicious. And I think every culture in the world has a cuisine. It's just that some cultures haven't been written down or haven't been elevated to the same status as some of the European nations that we see. That's right. And one of the things about Native cuisine is that, it's basically you grow it, you cook it, you maybe put it aside for the winter so that you have dried foods or whatever. But it's so close to the land and it's not as processed as what we eat in the United States today. So I would assume it's better for you.
Well, I think so. I'm probably a little biased, but yeah, it's the beginning of the farm to table movement. You grew something and then you made it into something delicious and you either ate it right away or maybe you dried it. Now we have freezers. A lot of us in northern New Mexico can freeze things. But there was a lot of different ways. And so all of these foods evolved over time and they're nutritious, they're delicious. And I think one of my philosophies is if you can't pronounce it, you might think about eating it.
Yeah. I'm always trying to become a healthy eater and fail miserably almost every single time. But I know one of the things I tried was to only buy foods with 3 or fewer ingredients. And that actually worked pretty well until I got, hungry for something that was terrible for me. But when you're eating squash, you're eating squash. When you're eating corn, it's corn. And when you're eating beans, then those are the 3 sisters, which are kind of, how are they the backbone of so much of food and cuisine in the Southwest?
Well, I really like to focus on what I call the Magic 8, and that is actually the chapters in the new cookbook. But there were 8 foods that Native people gave to the world that didn't exist anywhere outside of the Americas until after 1492. So corn, beans, and squash, also called the 3 sisters. And while that's not really a metaphor here in the Southwest, it's much more an indigenous metaphor with some of the tribes back east. The tribes here in New Mexico and the Southwest have always used those 3 together. The way they grow, their nutritional value, they're interconnected. Yeah. So corn, beans, and squash, chili, tomato, potato, vanilla, and cacao. And if we deconstruct that, that means that the Italians didn't have the tomato. The Irish didn't have the potato.
Think about the famine.
Right.
Yeah.
Britain had fish and no chips. No chilies in the Asian cuisine. And areas that we now think of delectable for their chocolate, like Switzerland or France or Belgium, no vanilla and no chocolate. And we do know, based on archaeological evidence and the scientists at the University of Mexico, that
chili, or theobromine, which is the marker for chili, was found in the tall cylinders in Chaco Canyon, New Mexico, telling us that somewhere between 1250 and 1500 years ago, chocolate was in Chaco Canyon. And that's pretty amazing because it was walked here. It was definitely used as an ingredient in trade amongst some of the tribal dignitaries or, the chiefs that sat down to have counsel.
Right. That's actually one of the things that I think we're just learning is how interconnected this part of the ancient world was in a way that we thought everyone was all isolated and living by themselves. Well, it turns out they were going to the coast to bring back shells or going into Mexico and meeting people who had come up from Central America. And there was a lot more exchange going on than we realized. And that was true with food.
The trade routes were extensive. Now we have USPS, we have FedEx, we have UPS, but back in the days before any of this, people were walking ingredients and trading. And I find that just fascinating. I think what a wonderful way to make an exchange with a culture group outside of your own. Yeah. So they were not isolated. They were definitely interacting with each other on a regular basis.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know how old I was when I learned that potatoes were not from Ireland. And that was like, oh. And you think about, the famine and how the world changed with that and all of the different foods that are based, like you said, fish and chips, and it came from the New World.
Right. It's definitely a New World ingredient and changing the cuisines in Europe and other parts of the world forever.
Yeah. And I think when it came to chili, I just assumed like in India, they had their own kinds. And then I realized, no, it was brought from here.
Yes.
Yeah. And now we eat Indian food and it's hot and, they have the spice level warnings and things like that, but it wouldn't have been that way
without the Native American contribution. Yeah.
That's just, fascinating. And we don't think about it enough, do we?
No, I think people are unaware of the contribution that Native people made to the foods we eat every day. Yeah. I don't think it's in the American consciousness, but we're trying to change that.
And those would be the period we call pre-contact.
Yes. So I broke down history into 4 distinct categories: the pre-contact period, the first contact period, the government issue period, and what Chef Walter and I call the new Native American cuisine, which is where we are now.
Right. And tell us the name of your latest cookbook.
So the latest cookbook is called Seed to Plate, Soil to Sky, and it's our first plant-based book. It's modern plant-based recipes using Native American ingredients, and I did that book with Chef Walter Whitewater, and it is amazing because it focuses on these 8 chapters, and within each chapter are both savory and sweet recipes focused on the Magic 8. And we went plant-based for a reason, because what we're finding, we work a lot in Native American communities, and the doctors and community health representatives and diabetes educators and all of the nurses are saying the same thing, that and this is across the board, but it's fairly prevalent in Native communities. We need to increase the intake of plants for health and wellness.
Right.
And I grew up with a mom that really didn't cook a lot of plants. And so I was disadvantaged in the sense that I didn't know how to cook. You go to a grocery store and you're like, that's a beautiful root, but how do I cook it? What is it? And so I think we're not learning enough to be able to cook some of these plants for health and wellness. And so that was the initiative, or the impetus in doing a plant-based book, is to try and get natives, but all Americans, to eat more plants. The standard American diet, which the acronyms are SAD,
is sad. Yeah, it is. On that note, we'll take a quick break and be back in a moment with more Conversations Different.
Are you dreaming of a home of your own in Santa Fe, but feel like your finances aren't where they need to be? HomeWise is here to help. We offer free financial coaching and classes in English and Spanish that will help you proactively manage your money and get you qualified for the best mortgage loan possible. Contact us today to register for an in-person or online class. or to speak with a home purchase advisor who you can work with one-on-one to help you increase your savings, reduce your debt, and improve your credit score. Call 505-983-9473 or visit us at homewise.org. Equal Housing Lender, NMLS number 188231.
We are back with Conversations Different, discussing the indigenous food movement with Lois Ellen Frank, a chef based in Santa Fe. In your Red Mesa Cuisine catering company, you must have some really yummy offerings that people have.
We do, and we work a lot in Native American communities with community members. We also train cooks for senior centers or Head Start or schools so that they can re-indigenize or bring back some of the ancestral foods and recipes for health and wellness in their own communities. And I think one of the biggest goals that we have is to make people independent. So we want to go in and make these trainings and then let them decide what they want on their plate. And each community is different. It's not up to us. What Chef Walter and I do is we help train and we give skills. And so, should we talk recipes?
Yes. Like, what would be a yummy side dish if I was inviting a bunch of relatives over, or if I just wanted to look like I could actually cook, which is not true, sadly.
Well, it's always a good idea to start with easy things. And I always recommend that you don't do a new recipe when everybody's coming over, that you do that on a night when it's just you and the small family unit, because that makes it more stressful.
I was just going to say, I have done that.
It's
the big
too,
recipe
it's
for
too
everybody.
stressful. Don't test
Yes.
it before so
Yes.
you know what to expect. How does your oven react? Is the recipe, does it work in your kitchen, etc. One of the really easy, delicious recipes is the spice roasted butternut squash. And right now we're doing this interview in winter, so we have all these wonderful winter squashes. But this is just butternut squash, and it's roasted with a little maple syrup, which is a native ingredient, and everybody can get some New Mexico red chili powder. And I always stress New Mexico red chili powder because I'm a little biased that I
Because
think
it's the best.
yes. And then some fresh sage, and it comes out roasted and delicious and very easy to do. So that's a really good one. There's also some soups, a white bean butternut squash and kale soup. Again, very easy. The way we create thickness in that soup, because when you're dealing with plants, sometimes there's not that fat content. So we just take a little bit out. This is chef's secret. And we put it in a blender.
Okay.
And that adds a thickening agent, right? And then we put it back into the
So
soup.
you basically puree the solid.
Right, but you don't want to puree the kale with the squash and the beans, only the beans and the squash together, because the kale makes it a really strange color. So you want to add the kale.
You don't want to have green soup for Thanksgiving dinner.
No. So you want to add that after. So
Okay.
you would cook it, and it says that in the recipe, and then blend a little, put that back in, and then add your kale. So that's another really easy, good recipe. And one of my other favorite ones is the butternut squash soup. You could
I
also
love
use
squash soup.
You could do pumpkin. We all still have pumpkins left
Yes.
over from, and I always buy good tasting pumpkins that I put outside. But that is with a chili oil. So probably the hardest part of that recipe is actually making the chili oil. And you would just heat the oil up.
You don't
with
just
some,
buy that at Smith's or Albertsons.
I don't know. I've never looked. I make it
You
from
make
scratch.
chili oil. I did see.
Yeah.
I'm
But
learning
it's
something
just
every day.
heating oil up with some chili pods.
Okay.
And
what
then-
kind of olive oil or?
Well, you want an oil that you can heat. I like to use an organic sunflower oil.
Okay.
Organic, because then you know it has not been genetically modified, unless the company's breaking
big liar or something?
breaking the law,
Yes.
which you hope not. But it is a really nice way to make this oil, and then that oil can be used for lots of different things. But
it's one of those things I never thought about, making something like that yourself, but that'd make a great Christmas present
lovely.
to make chili oil and put it in a pretty jar or something.
Yeah, so I use sunflower oil, garlic, and again, New Mexico red chili pods. You could go up to Chimayo and use
Yes.
a little spicier, the Espanola Valley, or you could go down south towards Hatch and get a milder chili. But you definitely want to use a red chili pod from the state of New Mexico.
No, they're the best. Every time I have company, we take our trip and we go to Chimayo and they go home very happy.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, the soil. It's one of the things about foods that are indigenous, as in to the place as opposed to like the tribes, but it's like they taste like New Mexico. Yeah. And that's whether you have beans from Moriarty or whatever you're getting, it has a distinct flavor, I think, that we have.
And it's not only the flavor. When I open a bag of red chili powder and I smell it, I smell the land. I smell New Mexico. I smell where I live. I love that. So I'm very smellscape orientated, taste orientated, a sound. I love to listen. When I went back east recently, the sounds were different. The birds are different. The way the leaves rustle, they have different trees. So I try and be very sensory open to when I go to a different place, how is it different from where I live?
No, that's so wise. And it probably, for me, it always made me homesick, but it also made me appreciate some things, especially back east, the places, because I lived in DC for a while. You can't see the sky wherever you are unless you get way out of town. And in New Mexico, it seems to me, even in Albuquerque, you can see the sky. And that's just one of those differences that, of place that we have.
Right. We also, this past summer, we went up to North Dakota, and it was our first time we worked with tribal communities up there, Chef Walter and I. And again, the land was different, and the moisture and the smells and the bugs, and it was different. Different.
No, that's totally, it kind of makes you appreciate the diversity. And going back to your Magic 8, it's like, think about Magic 8 across this huge continent and then South America as well.
Exactly. So, corn is a really interesting because from as far north as it'll grow to as far south as it'll grow, it is the dominant grain to this continent. We can look at other continents and say, well, rice is the dominant grain to India and Asia, and wheat the dominant grain to Europe and other parts of Europe that grow wheat. And you can look at the cultures and say the cuisines revolve around those dominant grains.
Right. And here, that's one of the hard things when you think about how prevalent diabetes is in the Native community. I mean, one of the first things the educators tell you is you must not eat corn. And I'm like, how can you tell a tribal person you can't have corn?
Well, they're talking mostly about sweet corn. If we look at sweet corn, it was really only eaten once a year when corn was ripe. And then maybe it was cooked in a pit overnight. It was steamed. It was dried. And when you have what we would call field corn that's left to dry, even the corn that's grown in like truchas for chicos, that corn has gone into a starch stage. It's no longer in a sweet stage. So those carbohydrates are actually good and they're slow released. It's different than just what we think of. I mean, we go to the supermarket now and you see a white corn and a yellow corn and they're hybrid.
Right.
These are indigenous corns that really don't spike blood sugar. So it's actually wonderful to eat. It's a very good food to eat for all people.
Wow, that's a good thing to know, because I know we've had trouble in our family figuring out what exactly was the right thing to eat and where to source it, because if you can't buy it at the supermarket, where do you go to get it so that you get something that's going to be, taste good and good for you?
Right.
And on that note, we'll take a quick break and be back in a moment with Conversations Different.
This is Patrick Dorsey, publisher of the Santa Fe New Mexican. Looking to reach a wider audience and grow your business? For 175 years, the Santa Fe New Mexican has been the trusted voice of Santa Fe, with unmatched local reach in print and online. In addition to our long-standing, independent, family-owned newspaper, we have a full-fledged marketing team with the expertise to help you succeed in the 21st century. From traditional print to precision targeted digital advertising, we have the tools to connect you with your ideal customers. Partner with us and see the results for yourself. Advertise with the Santa Fe New Mexican and unlock your business's full potential. Visit us at santafenewmexican.com/advertising or call us at 505-995-3852. Thank you.
we are back with Lois Ellen Frank discussing the Indigenous food revolution. And one thing I've been thinking about is when you talk about your 4 different groups, pre-contact, initial contact, there's the government era. And one of the ironies is that some of the foods we most associate with Native cuisine today comes from that era, especially I would say, fry bread and maybe even Orno, Indian bread, because you didn't have white flour in the same way before. So as we want to eat healthy and be more in touch with traditional roots, where do those foods have a place, or do they?
Well, again, that's up to each individual community. Some Native American communities want fry bread on their menus or on their plates, and some don't. But we have an alternative in the cookbook, the new cookbook, what we call no fry bread.
Oh, I like that.
So what we're doing, we have a blue corn version, and then we have a flour version. And what we're doing is we're taking the same exact dough. So it's basically water and baking powder and either cornmeal and flour or just the flour. And we're rolling it out, and then we're putting it either on a cast iron pan. Some of the Pueblos call it a tortilla bread. Apaches, some of the Apache communities call it a racket bread because it looked like a racket. Some Walter's tribe just says Navajo bread, but it's basically a flat bread. So it's very, very healthy because any flat bread, according to the doctors that we work with, is a slow release food. It's the fluffy breads that turn into sugar in the body. And so no fry bread can be made into an Indian taco. It can be used with soups or stews. And the other way we do it is we take it on a little cast iron grill, or you could use one of those racks that you cool cookies on.
Okay.
Right? So that looks like a racket. If you think, that crisscross design, put a fire underneath it or your burner and put the bread on it, and then it puffs up just like it's frying. You turn it over and it cooks on the other side, and it's delicious. It gets a little bit of brown, it gets a little bit of charring, and it's a great alternative to fry bread. But you are correct that fry bread was born from the government issue period. This would include, the Navajo internment in the southern part of the state, Bosque Redondo, which is now Fort Sumner. And, these rations were passed out, and Native people were supposed to exist on them. So it did change the indigenous diet. Yeah. And this is really where we start to see some of the health disparities begin. But it's not hard. The no fry bread is delicious. And we have kids, when we teach them, that say, Mama, look, there's something else beside fry bread. It's no fry bread. So we really love that. Yeah, that we can take something that's sort of iconic and just make it a little healthier. And I think that's been a big impetus, is how do we get, the lard out of tamales? Well, we make tamales.
Why would you want to?
Well, because if you want to eat them, you absolutely can do sometimes, right? I always do equate, can you eat glazed donuts every day? And the answer is no. Can you eat glazed donuts sometimes? Sure. Yeah. Can you eat fry bread sometimes? Sure. I go every Indian market. Can you eat it every day?
No. And the thing about, sometime foods is, we had a friend that moved to his house when we were living up there, and he would get a chicharron burrito every day at lunch. And then he gained weight, and he was like, why am I getting so fat? And my husband said, they only killed the pig once or twice a year. This is not an everyday food. And he's like, oh, you're right. And and it's so readily available. I mean, who wouldn't have a red chicharron burrito whenever they could? But it's not good for you.
Right.
Yeah.
So, we want to try and eat, we call it eat the rainbow. So as many plants of color that you can, get the reds and the yellows and the greens and the blues and all the colors, oranges, all different colors. And then, those foods that we think of as sometimes food, we limit them sometimes. Yeah. But back to the tamale. So what we did under the guidance, of doctors and health educators, was we used the sweet potato, cooked roasted sweet potato, to put into the masa to bind it together instead of the blue box.
Okay.
And it's so good.
Oh, I have
and
to try
that
that.
has zero fat.
Yeah.
So then you could eat those. You could
And
make
you get
tons
vitamin
in your
A and C.
Right. So that's something that your friend could eat every day.
Oh, I like
right?
that.
And then you could eat the other ones, during the holidays or whenever, your family. Usually Christmas is a big tamale time.
that I didn't eat meat for probably 4 or 5 years, and my exception every year was a good red
tamale.
pork tamale, because I think the other ones are lovely, but I love a red pork tamale. That's
So
just,
there you go. But that was once a year, right?
Yeah, it was.
Great.
And it was like 2, and that's it, because
They're
of course,
heavy.
Yeah, they are heavy. And my mom made empanaditas the old-fashioned way, the Spanish New Mexico way, where you grind the meat and put it all together and you simmer it overnight and then you fry them. And they probably have like 800 calories a piece because you fried them and you've got the meat, the sugar, and everything.
So we do an empanadita in the book with mushrooms, and we have a really good dough. We don't fry it.
Right.
So we're trying to move away, even though fried foods are delicious.
It's a baked
trying
one?
to move away. It's baked.
Yep.
And they're lovely. It's lovely. Yeah. It's
I didn't know people ate sweet empanaditas until I was very old, because in New Mexico, our cuisine was kind of
The meat
isolated.
ones,
It was,
right.
it was meat.
I like the veg. I'm a savory, but
Yeah.
different places do make maybe from apricot or from peach.
Yep.
Yeah.
The first time I ever had one of those, I was like, well, this is very interesting.
Uh-huh.
And it's good. They're very,
dessert
yes.
empanadita,
Yeah.
yeah.
And our meat ones are sweet. So they're kind of desserty, but they're also, they're just an interesting mix. I love them.
And I make mine small. That's why I call it empanadita.
Yeah.
Little empanada. But the true pies were larger.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we called it Ita, and they were still large. I don't know why, but yeah, my mom would put them in a coffee can and mail them overnight all over the country. And when she died, I'm not sure how much they missed her and how much they missed her empanaditas, because they were like, "Are you going to make them?" And I was laughing, like, "No, I'm
It's so labor intensive.
Oh, it is.
But it is something. I freeze them all the time. So
Yes.
I make tons. We spend a whole day, just
Yes.
like with tamales. How many can you whip out in a day? And 3 of us can do 150 to 200 tamales in a day. Same thing with an empanadita. So myself, Chef Walter, and an assistant. And then we just
put 'em
freeze them, put them in our little vacuum sealed packages, either by the dozen or by 10, and you're good to go.
And you're good to go. And the work was worth it.
It was
and,
worth it.
And the result is going to be amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
my
I
mom
fly
and I
all over.
Yeah.
We flew with
food.
3 coolers back east, and we had tamales from New Mexico and sauces from New Mexico and empanaditas. We can fly anywhere with them, and that way they get a taste of
What food
the
tastes
land here that they
Right.
wouldn't get there. And then we also use ingredients from wherever we go.
So you were back at Princeton cooking for students. Was that to help them be calm as they got ready for finals, or just like a cultural thing? Or
I think it was a combination of exposing people to Native American recipes to celebrate the new cookbook. Chef Walter and I talked to a couple of classes. They have dining halls.
right.
So in your first 2 years, you must be on a meal program. And so this was something different. And we got to go to different dining halls and meet the students and,
Kind of like a grown-up cooking with kids.
kind of,
Yeah.
we met one that said, "Oh, my grandma's from Taos, and thank you," and another said, "Oh, I'm Native and we don't have Native food." And, so it's just about trying to be inclusive and create diversity in the menus, because people cook what they know.
Right.
And depending on what the chefs are,
And the more
it's
you know,
just-
the more you can experience.
Exactly.
And in this case, you taste delicious food and you're healthier.
Right.
It's not just pizza and chicken fingers, or
Well,
I'm
that
sure
is
Princeton's a
outside-
little
no,
fancier,
right.
but
Yeah.
you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh,
So
that's-
it was fun. It was fun for the chefs. It was fun for the students. It was fun for us. It was just a great experience. We feel very blessed.
That's amazing. Lucky kids. What's next for you guys? You've got your cookbook, you've got your catering company, you're busy all the time.
That's a good question. And, we're moving into winter and we've been working crazy. So, January and February for Chef Walter and I think it starts in December, although people love you to do stuff in December. I have family coming this year, so I'm trying to not take too many jobs so I can be with them. But January and February, we figure out the year. So we have some different museums that we're going to be working with, some different communities. We'll be doing some traveling. I've been asked to do another book, so I have to decide. We dreamed this up during COVID because none of us worked. So we were testing recipes, and with the food we were using, we were feeding our neighbors. We had some elderly neighbors that were just alone and homebound. And so if we were testing, 3 or 4 days a week, we were putting food in her mailbox that she could walk up, some of the neighbors. And so it was a great project. We thought we could get it done before COVID ended, but then there's revisions and there's 5 photo shoots, and then you look and you say, oh, we need to do one more photo shoot. And then it takes almost a year for the printing and the books to come over by container because they're printed overseas. So it was about a little more than 3 years that our project that we dreamed up. So, I'm hesitant to say, what is next. I know we'd love to do a cookbook for kids.
Yeah.
That is in our heart, something simple and fun and healthy. Ultimately the goal, our mission is really about bringing Native American cuisine into every kitchen, educating people, but we really want people to be healthy and well. Yeah. Type 2 diabetes and obesity is the epidemic of this time period, and it's because the food. And so we just want to teach people how to do simple, healthy foods and really reclaim health and wellness. And I think that's a big impetus in what we do. So I can't tell you specifically, but it's still on that mission. I may teach at IAIA in the spring. We're discussing that. We have to see, you can't do too much, but also don't want to do nothing because as you age, you want to savor every...
You want to enjoy yourself.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah. And you think about it, it's not just a wellness of the community. Good agriculture, regional agriculture, tribal agriculture is also a way for people to stay in their communities and be successful and have, income, whether you're growing rice in the Midwest or whether you're growing chili here or corn. I mean, you think about the opportunities for people who want to stay in their land and in their community.
And so that brings up a really good point. And I'm going to encourage all of your listeners not only to go to a local farmer's market and purchase ingredients, but I think a really good example, I'm going to use Chicos. If people don't buy Chicos, so first of all, you have to grow a special kind of corn. It's Chicos corn. Then you have to know how to harvest it. And there's 2 ways to make Chicos. You can air dry it or you can roast it in the horno. So there's 2 different ways to do it. I like the roasted. That's just me, but there are 2 ways to do it. And then you have to know how to get the kernels off the cobs once they're either roasted or dried, and then it's Chicos and how to cook it in a soup or a stew. So if we stop buying this from our local farmers or the families that are still making it, they're not going to do it anymore. No. And so the pozole, the white corn, the blue corn, the red corn, the cornmeals, I try and buy as much from native communities or local communities. New Mexico, and especially northern New Mexico, we are so blessed. We have so much, but as much as you can. And it might seem like maybe it costs a little bit more, but you're supporting and guaranteeing that these things will be passed on and will be the legacy of the generations to come. And if we let them disappear, I think it's just going to be tragic.
Yeah, there won't be any more wonderful, like
the knowledge is gone.
Yeah, the knowledge is gone. And elk stew and Chicos are one of the best meals you can have.
I know.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. We did Chicos on accident once because we grew corn in our backyard and house because we hadn't landscaped. And we thought, why don't we grow some corn? We were in the middle of town. And then we took it out and let it dry because we forgot to do anything with it. And the next thing you knew, it was like, oh, I guess we better take it off. But it worked, and we had Chicos, and we decided perhaps we were not meant to be farmers. But it was an interesting experiment.
It is. And everybody should try and have a garden or grow a tomato plant or a chili plant. And what you can't provide for yourself, you can work with farms. I can from the local farms, and I love Gonzalez Farm. It's a family farm, so I work a lot with Jose Gonzalez, but I also work with Matt Romero at Romero Farms and some other farms. And
he's a legend.
I buy anywhere from 300 to 600 pounds of heirloom tomatoes, and then I can. So we're talking hundreds of jars, and it's delicious. So in the middle of February, when everybody else has only mealy tomatoes from the store, and there are none from the farm, I open a can of my delicious heirloom tomato sauce. And it's yummy. So, again, canning or freezing or drying, all of these things are wonderful ways to extend the season and be able to enjoy the bounty of what we have here from our farms or from what we grow.
And that is really what Thanksgiving was all about, is the bounty.
The harvest.
The harvest.
Yeah.
And on that note, this has been another Conversations Different. We'll be back next week.